Kierkegaard believed that many people never truly become themselves. They go through life doing what they are expected to do. They follow the path. They copy the rhythm. They accept the script. Go to school. Get a job. Find a partner. Build a life that looks normal from the outside. And then one day they wake up with a strange feeling they cannot explain. A feeling that says, "This is my life, but somehow I am not inside it." Kierkegaard was obsessed with this problem. Not simply the problem of unhappiness, but the deeper problem of losing yourself without noticing. Because a person does not always lose themselves through tragedy. Sometimes they lose themselves through obedience, through routine, through trying to be acceptable, through becoming the kind of person everyone else approves of. And the dangerous thing is, the world may reward you for it. People may call you responsible, successful, mature, stable. They may say you are doing well, but Kierkegaard would ask something more uncomfortable. Are you actually living? Or are you only performing the life you were taught to want? This question is difficult because most people are not forced into the wrong life. They are slowly guided into it by family, by culture, by fear, by comparison, by the quiet pressure to not disappoint anyone. No one needs to lock you in a prison if they can convince you that the prison is called success. And that is why Kierkegaard's philosophy still feels so personal. He understood that despair does not always look dramatic. Sometimes despair looks like a normal life. A person wakes up, goes to work, answers messages, smiles at the right time, says the right things, keeps moving, keeps functioning, and yet, somewhere deep inside, they are not themselves. They are living as a version of themselves that was built for approval. This is one of Kierkegaard's most important ideas. The self is not something you automatically have. The self is something you must become. You are born with a name, a body, a family, a place in the world. But that does not mean you have truly become yourself. To become yourself means to choose honestly. To stand in front of your own life and ask, what do I actually believe? What do I actually want? What am I afraid to admit? Who would I be if I stopped living for the eyes of others? Most people avoid these questions, not because they are stupid, but because the answers can be dangerous. If you ask yourself what you truly want, you might discover that the life you built does not belong to you. You might realize you chose a career because someone else respected it. You stayed in a relationship because leaving would disappoint people. You followed a dream that was never yours. You became obedient because rebellion felt too expensive. And once you see that, you cannot easily unsee it. This is why many people prefer distraction. It is easier to stay busy than to be honest. It is easier to scroll, work, laugh, drink, perform, chase and consume than to sit alone and ask, is this really me? Kierkegaard believed that the crowd is one of the greatest dangers to the individual, not because people are always bad, but because the crowd allows a person to hide from responsibility. In a crowd, you do not have to think deeply. You only have to follow. You only have to repeat what others are saying, desire what others desire, fear what others fear, laugh when others laugh, be offended when others are offended, move when others move, and slowly you disappear into the noise. The crowd gives comfort because it removes the burden of choosing, but it also removes the dignity of becoming, because to become yourself, you must stand apart at least inwardly. You must be willing to say, this may be what everyone is doing, but is it true for me? That is terrifying, because the moment you begin to live honestly, you may disappoint people. You may become less understandable, less predictable, less convenient. People who benefited from your old self may not celebrate your new honesty. They may call you selfish, confused, ungrateful, changed. And maybe you have changed. But sometimes change is not betrayal. Sometimes change is the first sign that a person is finally returning to themselves. Kierkegaard called this struggle despair, but he did not mean despair only as sadness. For Kierkegaard, despair is a sickness of the self. It is what happens when a person is not properly related to who they are. One form of despair is not wanting to be yourself. This happens when a person looks at their own life, their own weakness, their own past, their own truth, and wishes they could escape it. They want to be someone else, someone more admired, more loved, more confident, more successful, more normal. So they reject themselves. They hide from themselves. They create a version of themselves that is easier for the world to accept. But there is another form of despair, wanting to be yourself, but in the wrong way. This is the person who says, I will define myself completely. I will need no one. I will become powerful enough to never be hurt. I will create myself by force. This person may look strong, but underneath they are still trapped, because they are not becoming themselves honestly. They are becoming a reaction to pain, to rejection, to fear, to humiliation, to the need to prove something. And this is where Kierkegaard becomes very human. He sees that most people are not simply lost because they are weak. They are lost because becoming yourself requires courage. It requires you to face the possibility that your life has been built on borrowed desires, borrowed beliefs, borrowed fears, borrowed definitions of success. You may think you want money, but maybe you only want to stop feeling small. You may think you want fame, but maybe you only want to be seen by someone who ignored you. You may think you want love, but maybe you only want someone to finally tell you that you are enough. You may think you want a normal life, but maybe you only want safety from the anxiety of choosing something different. And this is the question Kierkegaard forces on us. How much of your life did you choose, and how much of it did you inherit without questioning? Because many people inherit more than they realize. They inherit religion, politics, ambition, fear, shame, family expectations, ideas of masculinity, ideas of femininity, ideas of what success should look like, ideas of when they should marry, what they should study, how they should speak, what kind of person they are allowed to become, and then they call it identity. But Kierkegaard would say that identity without inward choice is not truly the self, it is only a costume. A person can wear a life the way they wear clothes. It can fit well enough. It can look good to others, but still not belong to them. That is why the question, are you living your life or someone else's, is so uncomfortable, because the answer is rarely obvious. A false life does not always feel false in the beginning. Sometimes it feels safe, it feels praised, it feels reasonable, it feels like the right thing to do, until years pass, and the silence begins to speak. You find yourself tired in a way sleep cannot fix. You succeed but do not feel fulfilled. You are surrounded by people but still feel unseen. You keep reaching goals, but the emptiness remains. And then, slowly, the question returns. Is this really the life I wanted? Kierkegaard believed that anxiety plays an important role here. Most people think anxiety is only something to escape. But for Kierkegaard, anxiety can reveal freedom. Anxiety appears when you realize you can choose, that your life is not completely fixed, that you are not only a product of your past, that you are standing in front of possibility, and possibility is frightening. Because if you can choose, then you are responsible. You cannot blame the crowd forever. You cannot blame your parents forever. You cannot blame society forever. At some point, the question becomes, now that you see it, what will you do? This is why many people prefer not to see, because unconscious obedience feels easier than conscious responsibility. If you never ask what you want, you never have to risk choosing it. If you never admit you are unhappy, you never have to change. If you never question the script, you never have to face the fear of writing your own. But the cost is your life. Not biological life, not breathing, not existing, but the inner life. The part of you that knows when you are betraying yourself. The part of you that becomes quiet when you keep saying yes while meaning no. The part of you that watches you become everything except honest. Kierkegaard does not tell us to reject society for the sake of rebellion. He is not saying that every tradition is false. He is not saying that every ordinary life is meaningless. A simple life can be deeply authentic. A normal life can be chosen. Marriage can be chosen. Work can be chosen. Faith can be chosen. Family can be chosen. The problem is not whether your life looks ordinary. The problem is whether it is truly yours. There is a difference between choosing a life and sleepwalking into it. There is a difference between commitment and fear, between duty and surrender, between love and dependency, between peace and numbness, between becoming mature and becoming quiet because you no longer believe your desires matter. And maybe this is where many people get lost. They confuse acceptance with resignation. They say, this is just life. But sometimes what they mean is, I have stopped asking whether life could be different. They say, I am being realistic. But sometimes what they mean is, I am afraid to hope for anything more. They say, I am fine. But sometimes what they mean is, I have become very good at not listening to myself. Kierkegaard would not let us hide there. He would push us back toward the individual, back toward inwardness, back toward the private place where a person must stand alone before their own existence, not before the crowd, not before social media, not before family expectations, not before the imaginary audience watching their life, but before themselves. Because in the end, you are the one who must live your life from the inside. Other people can admire your choices. They can judge them. They can misunderstand them. They can applaud them. But they cannot live the consequences for you. They cannot feel the emptiness for you. They cannot carry the regret for you. They cannot answer the quiet voice that asks why you abandoned yourself. So perhaps the real tragedy is not failure. Maybe the real tragedy is succeeding at a life that was never yours, becoming exactly what people wanted you to become, and still feeling unknown to yourself. That is a frightening thought. But it is also freeing, because if a person can lose themselves slowly, they can also return slowly. Not always through one dramatic decision, sometimes through small acts of honesty. Saying no, admitting what hurts, noticing what feels false, letting go of an identity that only exists to impress others, choosing silence instead of performance, choosing truth instead of approval, choosing responsibility instead of hiding in the crowd. And maybe that is what it means to begin becoming yourself. Not to become perfect, not to become extraordinary, not to become someone everyone understands, but to become honest enough that your life begins to feel inhabited again, as if you are no longer only watching yourself live, you are finally present, finally choosing, finally willing to carry the weight of your own existence. Because Kierkegaard's question is not meant to make us hate the life we have, it is meant to wake us up inside it, to ask whether we are here by choice or only by habit, whether we are living from truth or from fear, whether we have become ourselves or only become acceptable. And maybe the question is not, what should my life look like? Maybe the deeper question is, when I am alone, away from everyone's expectations, do I recognize the person I am becoming? And maybe that is why Kierkegaard still matters. Because he understood that losing yourself does not always feel like destruction. Sometimes it feels like being praised for becoming someone you never chose to be. Sometimes it feels like comfort. Sometimes it feels like success. Sometimes it feels like doing everything right while something inside you quietly disappears. So ask yourself, are you living your life, or are you only protecting the life that others taught you to want? If this kind of reflection speaks to you, follow the Midnight Inquiry. Here we explore philosophy, literature, and the quiet questions that live inside the human soul.